sir. I mean, I got one more minute.
You got 30 seconds, actually. Okay, they've just called votes. If all members could go over, vote, and get back as quick as possible. We've got other members that are having to get out of here, but we do want to have a quorum present as quick as possible as soon as you go over and vote and get right back. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Quorum being present, the Committee on Veterans Affairs will come to order. We are meeting this morning to mark up 7 bills. There are amendments in the nature of substitute for 3 of these bills that were noticed by the committee, and these include the text of other bills that were passed on a bipartisan basis at a subcommittee level. Now, I'm pleased with the efforts of all the subcommittees and over the last few weeks to the input and the bipartisan legislation that reflects the priorities of the committee. We do our best when we work together. I now yield to the ranking member and his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I plan to save most of my comments for the agenda items before us, so I am happy to proceed to the business of the markup. I yield back.
Thank you. I now call up the bill H.R. 1669, the Vet Tech Authorization Act as amended. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 1669.
The text was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open for an amendment at any point. I now recognize myself for the purpose of offering an amendment. The clerk shall report the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute is dispensed with, and I ask that it be considered based text for purposes of this markup, and without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak in support of the amendment and in the nature of a substitute. The amendment is in the nature of a substitute on H.R. 1669, includes several changes offered by Representative McGarvey, the Vet Tech program. The Vet Tech pilot program was authored originally by Speaker McCarthy and Congressman Rokama. I did that right. In 2017, this bipartisan program has been a huge success. It has helped thousands of veterans not only find a job, but pursue a much better career. The program has an 80% graduation rate, 63% employment rate, and an average starting salary of these veterans is $65,000. That's a pretty good for a government program, and the Vet Tech program has full support of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I'm proud to improve it here today. Just 2 days ago, Vet Tech providers told us that the program has run out of funds and they can no longer accept new students. This has put about 2,500 students, veterans, in danger of no longer going to school and missing out on a better career opportunity. Time is not on our side here, which is why I urge all of my colleagues to support the proposal so that we can bring this bill to the floor as soon as possible. My amendment also includes several other bills that had bipartisan support at the subcommittee level, including H.R. 234, H.R. 1169, H.R. 746, H.R. 1798, and H.R. 1635. Finally, this amendment in the nature of substitute is fully offset by the extending the current VA home loan funding fees to 2031. This is a bipartisan offset that we have used in the past and is supported by veteran service organizations, and I encourage my colleagues to support my amendment. Do any other members wish to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1669? I recognize Ranking Member Takano for the purposes of offering an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The authority that this amendment extends expires on May 11th. In 13 days, homeless veterans on the street will go without food, clothing, and shelter if we fail to act. The underlying language of my amendment is Congresswoman Sherfilis McCormick's H.R. 645, the Healthy Foundations for Homeless Veterans Act. This legislation would extend authorities that we established during the pandemic, which have proven critical to VA's efforts to end veteran homelessness. During the pandemic, one of the toughest crises our country has faced, VA actually reduced, let me say that again, reduced veteran homelessness by 11% and housed over 40,000 veterans. That success can be directly attributed to the flexibilities and funding made available in the American Rescue Plan. My amendment authorizes VA to continue to use funds immediately to immediately connect homeless veterans with the resources they need, like food, transportation, clothing, shelter, and communication devices. Failure to extend this authority would claw back the critical gains we've made and veterans in need will spend more time on the street if we do not act. And while I believe the authority in this amendment should be permanent, at the majority's request, the bill was limited to a 2-year extension to reduce the cost at subcommittee markup. My willingness to shorten a vital benefit for homeless veterans, I believe, demonstrates both a good faith negotiation on my part and the urgency and seriousness of this matter. I understand your objection to H.R. 645 on today's agenda was due to how the Congressional Budget Office scored the bill because of the Toxic Exposure Fund. Like you, Mr. Chairman, I remain concerned about CBO's new scoring methodology for veterans legislation. I know you want to find a solution, but I want to be clear. I don't think the solution is to change or undermine the TEF. I have spoken with many members, including on the Budget and Appropriations Committee and in Democratic leadership, and I came to the conclusion that there was not a workable change to the TEF that would not undermine its fundamental purpose, which is to ensure that toxic exposed veterans are not pitted against other veterans and that veterans are not pitted against other domestic spending priorities. This is a line that we have drawn with PACT, the PACT Act, and the TEF, and it is a line that I stand by as well. My Republican colleagues have argued in favor of going back to the pre-TEF days of funding that would subject toxic exposed and burn pit veterans to uncertainty about whether funding will be available to cover their claims or stripping away the protections of mandatory spending. The solution here is not to go back to the pre-TEF days, especially as we are now in an environment where funding is uncertain for non-defense discretionary programs. I do think that we need to continue to work with CBO to try and refine its methodology, because I do not think it reflects congressional intent. I also think there should be a serious conversation about the harm that comes from hamstringing veterans policy because of arbitrary rules like cut go and pay go. And I think this is the case no matter who is in power in the House. Under these budget rules, we are left to work with limited offsets, so I would think the right approach is to focus on the most critical priorities. And that is why I'm fighting so hard for this amendment to be given the same consideration for the same offsets as the Republican bill priorities that will pass out of our committee today. Now, the cost of the vet tech package is over $400 million. My amendment in the nature of a substitute, however, is over, the amendment, not my amendment, the amendment in the nature of a substitute, however, is over offset by $3 million. So the bill, Mr. Chairman, your bill, Mr. Chairman, is offset, it's $3 million over offset. And I ask you, is it too much to ask to use that $3 million for homeless veterans? My amendment would cover the remaining $3 million cost and allow VA to bring in more veterans from off the streets. The cost of not helping these veterans is much greater. Homeless veterans will be left to use emergency rooms to access health care and services, which is much more costly. On average, $44,400 is spent per year for the highest users of emergency departments. This bill costs around $500 per homeless veteran. This amendment is also a serious suicide prevention tool, and we know that homeless veterans are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than their veteran peers. This bill allows VA to identify homeless veterans and connect them to care and services immediately. So I want to share a story from a VA case manager to illustrate the real impact of this authority. A veteran was residing in a storage shed in the middle of rural America. Because of this authority, VA was able to give the veteran a phone, pay for a hotel to get him immediately off the streets, and use rideshare to get him to a hotel. I'm certain the funding saved his life, as he refused to leave the storage shed if he had to go into a shelter. The Midwest was experiencing the Arctic blast with temperatures reaching negative 17 degrees. Rideshare was then used for a housing search and attending medical appointments and job interviews. The veteran is now employed, housed, and thriving in the HUD-VASH program. It is impacts like this that we will be impeding if we fail to act to extend this authority. Every day Congress fails to authorize and fund VA homeless programs leads to another night that a veteran is at risk of languishing on the streets. This amendment brings veterans off the streets and saves lives. I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back, and I recognize myself in opposition to the amendment. My concern is not with the underlying policy, as I support providing this type of assistance to homeless veterans, and I will say it again, I support the assistance for homeless veterans. My concern is how this proposal would be funded. Unfortunately, this proposal is impacted by the Toxic Exposure Fund that was created by the passage of the PACT Act. Last September, I warned Ranking Member Takano and that the Toxic Exposure Fund that was created in the Senate Democrats' version, which was finally passed as the PACT Act, would paralyze the committee. And unfortunately, I was correct. We are still stuck because PACT directed CBO to score any bill that touches the fund with a new mandatory cost. We simply do not have the offsets to deal with all of this mandatory cost that will not now impact veterans, healthcare, and others accounts. No one wanted this to happen. CBO warned us before the PACT Act was enacted that this would happen with the language that was in it. And now our work is restricted by it. Unfortunately, during my 2 markups last Congress, my amendment to repeal only the mandatory Toxic Exposure Fund failed on party line vote. During these markups, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said that we were trying to defund the PACT Act, which is simply not true. Let me say it again. It is not true. They tried to say that we could somehow wish away the scores from CBO. We all know that that's not true, and that wasn't true then, and it's not true now. Now we must deal with the consequences of these partisan actions. The budget gimmick the previous majority pushed for and refused to come to the negotiation table to fix are now negatively impacting veterans. I know that my proposal last year to fully repeal the Toxic Exposure Fund may not have had the votes to pass, but however, no one else has put pen to paper to propose any other solutions. And now, the public health emergency ends on May 11th. And I know that the homeless veterans in both urban and rural areas need this proposal. But I also know that we cannot afford to add millions of dollars to a bill's estimate and pay extra for something we do not have to do. Next week, we will have a Four Corners meeting with the VSOs to discuss the impact of the Toxic Exposure Fund has had on veterans legislation. Now, my staff has already heard from homeless community providers asking for us to find a solution to the TIF so that we can finally move forward with this legislation. All of us need to come together, find a solution to the Toxic Exposure Fund so we can advance H.R. 645 and hopefully many more proposals through the committee and to the floor. To be clear, I purposely did not include several GOP proposals at this markup because they also had Toxic Exposure Fund issues. To all of my colleagues, I hope we can work together in a bipartisan solution instead of sweeping under the rug the consequences of our actions last year. Does any other member wish to speak on the Takano amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased that the underlying ANS includes 2 veterans education bills I introduced with my Republican colleagues. First, it includes H.R. 1169, the VA E-Notification Enhancement Act, which I introduced with Representative Arrington, who once chaired this subcommittee. The VA E-Notification Act will ensure veterans can receive notifications for education benefits electronically, making the process easier, quicker, and more efficient for veterans. Second, the ANS includes H.R. 1635, the Filipino Education Fairness Act, from Representative Kiggins and myself, which finally fixes an outdated limitation on GI Bill payments for education programs in the Philippines. We must deliver fairness for student veterans who wish to pursue their education in the Philippines. I look forward to advancing these important bills out of committee today and onto the floor soon. However, I am disappointed that the majority did not include H.R. 645, the Healthy Foundations for Homeless Veterans Act, in today's markup. The Johnny Isaacson and David P. Rowe Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act of 2020, which I sponsored, authorized VA to spend funds on basic needs for homeless veterans, such as food, transportation, shelter, communication equipment, and clothing, during the covered public health emergency caused by COVID-19. This was a long-needed change in policy that allowed VA to expend funds for essentials, the foundational elements of a person's well-being. With the end of the public health emergency approaching, there is an urgent need to extend this authorization to continue combating veteran homelessness. The Takano Amendment we're considering now will do that by adding the Healthy Foundations for Homeless Veterans Act to this broad ANS, which already covers an array of VA programs and veterans benefits. Specifically, the amendment would allow VA to continue providing homeless veterans with basic necessities to ensure their survival, safety, and health through September 30, 2024. This bill is particularly important for veterans residing in rural areas where it's often harder to reach services and resources. We cannot reasonably expect a veteran experiencing homelessness to transition into permanent housing and a stable livelihood without access to basics like food, clothing, and transportation. The communication devices and data plans VA can purchase through this authority are also a critical lifeline to health care and resources that are otherwise impossible for homeless veterans to access. To date, VA has used nearly $9 million to pay for essentials for over 39,000 veterans through this authority. The authority has also been used to pay for over 416,000 rides for nearly 42,000 homeless veterans to get them to and from medical appointments and job interviews. And the value here is more than just numbers. As we heard in our legislative hearing last month from VA's staff who are using these funds to care for homeless veterans, this flexibility is changing veterans' lives. VA's work during the pandemic to help more homeless veterans was truly an accomplishment, but it was only possible because this committee acted. Now it's time to act again before this progress is lost. I want to be very clear. Without these authorities, we will never be able to fully end and prevent homelessness for every veteran experiencing it or at risk of it. That's why the Healthy Foundations for Homeless Veterans Act is supported by not only the Department of Veterans Affairs, but also Disabled American Veterans, National Alliance to End Homelessness, National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, Mazone, Bento, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Jewish War Veterans of the USA, Minority Veterans of America, Community Solutions, the American Legion, and Code Platoon. I urge my colleagues strongly, join these groups in supporting homeless veterans by voting in favor of the Takano Amendment. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek to speak on the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman, I seek to be recognized.
You're recognized. 5 minutes.
I want to thank Ranking Member Takano for introducing this amendment, which includes my bill, H.R. 645, the Healthy Foundations of Homeless Veterans Act. Passing H.R. 645 is crucial as the existing VA authority to help homeless veterans experience in just 13 days when the public health emergency comes to an end. Letting this authority lapse is unconscionable. As a slap in the face to our veterans across the nation, I want to stress the number of people we've already helped and the promise that we have to our veterans. Since this authority has been granted, the VA has permanently housed over 40,000 homeless veterans. It has provided over 400 rides to nearly 42,000 homeless veterans. I know we already repeated these numbers, but it's important that we know that there are people behind the lives in these numbers who will be affected in just 13 days. I urge all my colleagues to approve this amendment and consider the veterans and the responsibilities we have to our veterans. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. Is there anyone else seeking to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chair.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Boss, and I'm grateful for the leadership on this committee, and for your leadership on this committee, and I'm looking forward to our continued work in advocating for our nation's veterans. I am pleased to see 2 pieces of legislation I introduced being considered today. One being the Veterans Appeals Backlog Improvement Act, which would help reduce the wait times in disability appeals claims at the Board of Veterans Appeals. And I thank you, Chairman Boss, for including this in your amendment to the Veterans Benefits Improvement Act. My other bill that is before us now is H.R. 1669, the Vet Tech Authorization Act. This bipartisan effort, which I introduced with Chairman Boss and Congressman Khanna, would extend an invaluable program for our veterans, the Veteran Employment Through Technology Education Courses, or Vet Tech program. I am proud to have partnered with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on these bills, and I look forward to working to bring them to the House floor and to President Biden's desk. I urge you all to vote yes on these common sense solutions for our nation's heroes. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Landsman, do you seek recognition?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to speak on, in support of Mr. Takano's amendment. One of the reasons I joined this committee was because of its reputation as being bipartisan and our ability to work on those issues that are categorically bipartisan, and housing veterans, making sure that we are dealing with the issue of those veterans who are homeless is one of those issues where everyone agrees. And my hope is that this does pass unanimously. This is one of those moments where you have an opportunity to make an enormous impact on the lives of veterans who are in all of our communities struggling to find affordable housing. So I hope that this is one of those bipartisan moments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. You will recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Like Congressman Landsman, when I was selecting committees, I really thought about the number of veterans that I've had the honor to serve as the executive director of a homeless service agency a couple of years ago. And I knew that this could be a committee where issues like housing, basic needs for veterans could be addressed, and we can do that in bipartisanship. And recognizing where we are today in 2023, when COVID-19 pandemic had struck 3 years ago, our communities understood that there would be an impact that in some cases would have 5, 8, 10 years of consequences. And Congress took action to ensure that our most vulnerable communities would be supported. In 2020, Congress authorized the VA to spend funds on wraparound services and basic needs for our homeless veterans during the public health emergency. This was pivotal for our veterans who needed the critical assistance. And look, the reality is that while the public health emergency on COVID-19 is ending May 11th, the challenges that veterans experiencing homelessness are contending with are not going away. Quite frankly, they're just growing. That is why, as a member of this committee, I asked my colleagues to support Ranking Member Takano's amendment to the ANS to HR 1669. Our veterans experiencing homelessness need our help urgently, and this amendment will extend the authorization of funds which will allow the VA to provide veterans experiencing homelessness with wraparound assistance to ensure their survival, their safety, and their health for 2 more years. I want to add that as a former leader and director of a homeless service agency, I know how difficult it is for organizations to be able to help someone move from homelessness, sleeping at a shelter in a church basement, into permanent, stable housing. And I understand the complexity of moving them as quickly as possible to permanent, quality, stable housing. I also understand that when we talk about housing, there's an intersection with the supportive services. How do they get to the services that they need? How do we make sure that they have access to case management? How do they get the transportation necessary? How do they get the basic needs that they need to be able to be fully stable? And I know firsthand how game-changing this authority is for providers. This amendment could not have been offered in a more timely manner. Our veterans experiencing homelessness need our help, and they need it right now. We cannot say we support our veterans if we cannot deliver for our most vulnerable veterans who risk their lives for all of us. So I again urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment so that we can continue to support and ensure the safety and well-being of our veterans. Thank you, Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Anyone else seek recognition? As I said in my statement on this amendment in the first place, we are not opposed to the policy at all. We're willing to work with both sides of the aisle and both sides of the rotunda to make sure we can find the answer on how to cure this problem and readdress some of the other problems we also did not put in this markup because of the problem that we have with the TEF. And it is a problem that is going to continue to come back up if we don't get dealing with it. So with that, hearing no other questions, now occurs the amendment in the amendment. The question is now occurs on the amendment to the nature of a substitute on H.R. 1669 offered by Ranking Member Takano. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Ranking Member.
I request a quarter vote.
A roll call vote has been requested in accordance with the committee rule 4E. This vote will be postponed. And there are further amendments. Hearing none, the further proceedings on this bill will be postponed. I now call up H.R. 562.
H.R. 562, to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to permit members of Congress to use facilities of the Department of Veterans
The question-
Affairs
I'm sorry.
of the purposes of meeting with constituents and for other purposes, be enacted by the Senate and House Representatives of the United States of America.
The bill was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules without objection. The first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open for amendments at any point. H.R. 562, as amended, will require VA to allow members of Congress access to the space in VA facilities in order to meet with their veterans constituents. This is not a new idea. Some facilities allow this while others don't. This bill is not partisan at all. VA has granted members from both parties access to workspace in the past. VA also provides rooms when available for VSOs and the union representatives, and those are in law. And I understand that not every VA facility can accommodate the space for office hours, which is why this bill is different from the last Congress and includes some limitations and requirements. It allows the veterans access to their members of Congress in locations where they are comfortable and also at the same location where veterans likely requiring immediate casework assistance can certainly result in a positive outcome. Now, I urge all of my colleagues to support H.R. 562 as amended, and I yield back. Do any other members wish to comment on H.R. 562? Mr. Ranking Member.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, I'm not able to support this bill today. I certainly understand the importance of members of Congress providing constituent services, which includes helping veterans access their earned VA health care and benefits. However, I cannot support this bill, and I'll tell you why. First, I have concerns about VA medical facilities locking themselves into leases with members of Congress rather than having the flexibility to use all available space as they see fit to directly serve veterans. And even if a VA medical facility has extra space today, it is conceivable that the needs of the facility and the veterans it serves could change before the lease is up. Being locked into a lease with a member of Congress would limit the facility's ability to quickly adapt and repurpose space to meet emerging needs in real time. And I'm also concerned that this bill does not do enough to safeguard against the risk of Hatch Act violations. The Hatch Act prohibits political activity on federal property, including showing preference to one office over another based on political party or allowing constituent engagement in the weeks running up to an election. Campaigning and political activity have no place within the walls or on the grounds of a VA hospital. And even if the bill says that VA or any member of Congress renting space at a VA facility must comply with the Hatch Act, we should not be putting local VA healthcare executives in the position of having to police Hatch Act compliance on an ongoing basis. For these reasons, I cannot support H.R. 562 as amended, and I do urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back.
Does any other member wish to speak on this? No amendments were filed. Does any other member at all wish to speak on the amendment of H.R. 562? Does any other member wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question now occurs on the agreeing to the bill of H.R. 562 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
Independent chair, the ayes have it. The bill is, as amended is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Representative Berkman for a motion to report H.R. 562 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, and dissenting views on H.R. 562 as amended.
So noted. So I now recognize Representative Berkman for a motion to report H.R. 562 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report H.R. 562 favorably to the House.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
Independent chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 562, as amended, is reported favorable to the House floor. I now call up the bill H.R. 1089, the VA Medical Center Facility Transparency Act. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 1089.
Text was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Congresswoman Miller Meeks for the purposes of offering her amendment. The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R.
I ask
1080.
unanimous consent that further reading of this amendment is in nature of a substitute will be dispensed with, and I ask to be considered base text for the purposes of this markup, and without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Dr. Miller Meeks for 5 minutes to speak in support of the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute that combines the common sense text of H.R. 1089, H.R. 41 as amended, and H.R. 693, all bills that were reported favorably out of the recent Health Subcommittee markup. My amendment would increase transparency concerning VA medical facility operations for Congress and veterans by requiring VA Medical Center directors to make available annual fact sheets highlighting facility services, accomplishments, and challenges. Those who oversee, and more importantly, those who rely on that care from that facility will have better access to easy-to-understand information. My amendment would improve veteran customer service experiences that guaranteeing any veteran who calls the VA to request care is able to schedule their appointment during that phone call. Finally, my amendment would enhance quality of care by limiting the carousel of detailed and acting medical center directors assigned to fill a vacancy, a practice that has become all too common. It should be a priority that this critical position is filled by stable, accountable leadership. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman yields back, and I thank you, Dr. Miller Meeks, for her dedication to improving veterans' customer service. I also want to thank Representative Lesko, Baird, and Womack for introducing the bills included in this amendment in the nature of a substitute. It has my full support, and do any other members wish to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1089?
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition.
Ranking member, you're recognized.
I support the Miller Meeks ANS to 1089 and the underlying bill, and urge my colleagues to support this measure. I yield back.
No other thank you for yielding back. No other members' amendments were filed. Does any other member wish to offer amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1089? Hearing none, the question now occurs on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of substitute for H.R. 1089. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Takano for a motion on reporting H.R. 1089 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 1089 as amended be favorably reported to the House.
All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 1089 as amended is reported favorable to the House. Ranking member.
Pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, and dissenting views on H.R. 1089 as amended.
Without objection. I now call up the bill H.R. 1530 as amended, the Veterans Benefit Improvement Act. The clerk shall report the bill.
H.R. 1530.
Text was circulated in advance and pursuant to committee rules without objection. The first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is now open for amendments at any point. I now recognize myself for the purpose of offering an amendment. The clerk shall report the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent that that further reading of this amendment in the nature of a substitute will be dispensed with, and I ask that it be considered base text for the purpose of this markup. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak in support of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. My amendment in the nature of a substitute combines the text of H.R. 1530 and as amended, and H.R. 1329 as amended, and H.R. 1378 as amended. I appreciate Congressman Luttrell, Congressman Self, Congressman Cisamani, and for their leadership on these three bills, and respectively. This bill would make several improvements to the VA disability exam process for veterans who apply for benefits, such as enhancing communications to the veteran on the schedule of their appointment. Additionally, the amendment in the nature of a substitute would add in Rep. Self's proposal, which is authorize 2 additional judges in the Court of Appeals for the veterans' claims. The court believes these additional judges are necessary to prevent a backlog of appeals. Finally, the amendment in the nature of a substitute adds in H.R. 1378 with the changes to ensure that VA can implement it. This is a provision This provision would require VA to establish an internship program at the Board of Veterans Appeals, which makes improvements to the Office of General Counsel, Honors Attorney Program, and the Board's Law Clerk Program. Representative Sismani bill intended to help the Board hire, retrain, and recruit qualified attorneys, which may help reduce the number of pending appeals at the Board. Do any members wish to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute on H.R. 1530 as amended? Seeing none? Mr. McGarvey, I recognize Mr. McGarvey to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute on H.R. 1530 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the ANS at the desk.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a
I ask
substitute.
unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bipartisan amendment will allow the Board of Veterans Appeals to reimburse the annual bar dues for participants in its law clerk program. This will lower the barriers for early career attorneys for whom cost might be a burden and help attract top legal talent into the VA. We must do everything we can to ensure our veterans have the speedy and efficient justice they deserve. I want to thank the chairman for including the ANS to H.R. 1530, and I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back, and I'm supportive of the gentleman's amendment. Does any other member wish to speak on Mr. McGarvey's amendment to the amendment on the nature of substitute?
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition.
Ranking member.
Thank you, Chairman Boss, for offering this amendment in nature of substitute to 1530, and Mr. McGarvey for his amendment for his AANS, which I support. I'd also want to thank Subcommittee Chairman Luttrell and Ranking Member Pappas for working in a bipartisan manner on the issues in this package. I commend Representative Siscomani and Representative McGarvey for their contributions as well. I urge my colleagues to support both measures, and I yield back.
Does anyone else seek to speak on the amendment? Hearing none, the question now occurs on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute on H.R. 1530 offered by Representative McGarvey. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1530? The question now occurs on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of a substitute on H.R. 1530 as amended. All those in favor say aye. 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 All opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The nature of the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Ranking Member Takano for a motion on H.R. 1530 as amended.
I move that H.R. 1530 as amended be favorably reported to the House.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 1530 as amended is reported favorably to the House. I now call up H.R.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on H.R. 1530 as amended.
So noted. I now call up H.R. 1529, the Veterans Cost of Living Adjustment Act. The clerk shall report the bill.
H.R. 1529.
The bill was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is open for amendments at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized to speak on the bill? No amendments were filed, and are there any amendments that anyone has at this time? The question now occurs on the bill H.R. 1529. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Mr. Takano for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 1529 be favorably reported to the House.
All those in favor, there is a motion to favorably report H.R. 1529. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1529 is favorably reported to the House.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on H.R. 1529.
So noted. I now call up H.R. 1256, the Veterans Health Administration Leadership Transformation Act, as amended. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 1256, to amend
The
Title
bill was
30
circulated in advance and pursuant to committee rules without objection. The first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is open to amendments at any point. Does any member wish to comment on H.R. 1256?
Chairman.
Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Chairman Bost. I appreciate you including my bill, the VHA Leadership Transformation Act, on today's agenda. The intent of this bill is to provide greater leadership stability at VHA and empower the agency to more effectively address veterans' health care needs. My bill, as amended by the Health Subcommittee at its recent markup, would extend the term of the appointment for the VA's Undersecretary of Health, or USH, to 5 years. It would also eliminate an existing statutory requirement that at least 6 out of the 8 VHA's Assistant Undersecretaries for Health would be physicians or dentists. My bill would shield VHA from turnover in its highest leadership positions with every change in presidential administration. Those who are new to our committee may not know this, but VA was without a Senate-confirmed USH between January of 2017 through July of 2022, the entirety of the Trump administration and the first year and a half of the Biden administration. During this time, 6 different individuals rotated through this office, either acting as or performing a delegable duties of the Undersecretary for Health. The process for appointing an USH is not as straightforward as many other presidential appointments. VHA Undersecretaries for Health are nominated after a 10-person commission appointed by the Secretary identifies, interviews, and recommends at least 3 candidates for the President to consider. Then the Senate must confirm the nominee. Such a commission was stood up 3 times during the Trump administration and twice in the first year of the Biden administration before Senate finally confirmed Dr. Sharif El-Nahal in July of 2022. If there is any lesson to be learned from this, it is that getting an USH into place is not an easy process. Therefore, when a thoroughly vetted candidate makes it through this process, it would behoove us and the VA employees, and most importantly, veterans, to keep them in place long enough to carry out the critically important work they were appointed to do. There are a number of other positions across the federal government, 5-year terms, including the Social Security Administrator, the Federal Aviation Administrator, and the IRS Commissioner. The Director of the FBI serves a 10-year term. If any incoming president ever wants to replace any of these officials prior to the expiration of their term, they have the authority to do so, and my bill would allow the same for the VA Undersecretary for Health. As I said earlier, the second provision of my bill would remove statutory restrictions on the professional background of individuals selected to serve as assistant undersecretaries for health at VHA. In the private sector, individuals from the variety of different educational backgrounds and skill sets are leading large healthcare systems, and it is simply not as common as it once was for a chief executive position to be held by doctors. My legislation will allow VA's healthcare system to adapt to the way healthcare is delivered today to enable VHA to recruit its top healthcare executives from a much broader pool of candidates. I am pleased that the Department of Veteran Affairs is supportive of my bill, which also received positive reactions from the Comptroller General of the United States and the VA Inspector General. At our first oversight hearing earlier this year, I am also pleased, possibly even elated, to share that CBO's preliminary estimate is that this bill would cost very, very little to implement and not affect direct spending of revenues. How often do we get to say that? As the ranking member of the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee, I firmly believe that strong, stable leadership is the foundation upon which accountability is built. My bill provides an extremely low-cost, common-sense solution that will help bring to VHA the kind of transformational leadership that veterans deserve. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 1256. Thank you again for including it in today's agenda. Chairman Bost, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Did any other members wish to comment on H.R. 1256? Mr. Rotendale, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the Veterans Health Administration Leadership Transformation Act would change the Undersecretary of Health appointment for 5 years. It would also remove the current limit of 8 Assistant Secretaries of Health. I understand Congressman Mervan's intention in introducing this bill is to depoliticize the Veterans Health Administration by extending the term of the VA Undersecretary of Health and avoid leadership turnover with every change in presidential administration. I agree that the VA should be depoliticized and would be happy to work with you, Congressman Mervan, to achieve this objective. As you know, we did a lot of good work together last Congress. However, the unfortunate fact that must be acknowledged is that the Veterans Health Administration has been politicized by the Biden administration. The VA has been using taxpayers' funds to pay for abortions, promote transgender hormone therapy, and veterans have been denied care over their unwillingness to wear face masks. None of this does anything to help veterans. I've even heard from multiple constituents who cannot wear masks because of medical reasons being mistreated by the VA because of it. I cannot support a bill that would create a situation in the future where a partisan Undersecretary of Health will be thrown on the next administration. That would create a scenario where an Undersecretary works against the administration they're actually supposed to be working for. This would result in a waste of time and resources and more confusion for veterans. I will not support this legislation, and I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to comment on H.R. 1256? Mr. Ranking Member.
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition. I support H.R. 1256 as amended and the underlying bill and urge my colleagues to support this measure. In my 10 years on the committee, my 11 years on the committee, it's been my observation that lack of continuity of leadership is one of our biggest challenges in being able to improve veteran services to our veterans. Mr. Mervan's legislation will help prevent leadership gaps like those we have seen at VHA over the last decade and enable the agency to recruit senior leaders with more diverse professional backgrounds. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to comment on H.R. 1256? Seeing none. No amendments were filed. Do any other members wish to offer an amendment to H.R. 1256? Hearing none, the question now occurs on agreeing to Bill H.R. 1256 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. An independent chair, the ayes have it, and the bill will, as amended, is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Takano for a motion to report H.R. 1256 as amended to the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 1256 as amended be reported favorably to the House.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Independent chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 1256 is reported favorably. I now call...
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on H.R. 1256 as amended.
So noted. I now call up H.R. 366, the Korean American Valor Act. The clerk shall report the bill.
H.R. 366, to amend Title 38.
The bill was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is open to amendments at any point. I would like to thank Ranking Member Takano for his work on this bill, and it has my full support. Do any members wish to comment on H.R. 366?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ranking Member Takano.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciate you including my Korean American Valor Act in today's agenda. It is appropriate to consider this bill as we recognize the 70th anniversary of the Korean American Alliance, and it is timely, as just yesterday we heard the joint address, to a joint session of Congress from President Yoon Suk Yeol, as we now take stock of how the United States has been served by this alliance and how it benefits U.S. interests to continue to find ways to strengthen the ties between our countries and respective nations' veterans. It is not a well-known story, but over 300,000 Koreans served alongside U.S. service members in Vietnam. And these Koreans fought with us, and many died in this service. This legislation provides eligibility for VA health care to veterans who served in the armed forces of the Republic of Korea as allies of the United States during the Vietnam War, who have since become naturalized citizens. At last count, there are only about 2,800 veterans left who would potentially benefit from this expansion of VA's Allied Beneficiary Program. This will be done through a reciprocal agreement. Korea would reimburse the United States for health care services VA furnishes to these Korean American veterans. In exchange, the U.S. will reimburse Korea for health care it provides to veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces residing in Korea. There is precedent for this type of agreement with our allies. Since 1958, through its Allied Beneficiary Program, VA has had the authority to treat veterans who have served in the armed forces of nations that were allied with the United States during World War II and during World War I and World War II. These veterans do not need to be U.S. citizens, and VA has the authority to treat veterans of any combat area. VA furnishes this care through reciprocal agreements which have been established with the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and South Africa. In 1976, VA's Allied Beneficiary Program was extended to certain veterans who had served in the armed forces of Czechoslovakia or Poland during World War I or World War II, who subsequently became U.S. citizens. Last month, on the 50th anniversary of the date the last combat troops left Vietnam, we honored the men and women who served in Vietnam. It is time for our nation to properly honor the service of these Korean-American veterans who served side by side with U.S. troops. My bill has bipartisan support. I want to thank Dr. Murphy for his recent co-sponsorship. I also thank Representative Van Orden for sharing with us his Uncle Bob's story at the Health Subcommittee's recent legislative hearing on this bill. Mr. Van Orden's uncle served alongside Korean troops during the war, and I hope we can add his name to our list of co-sponsors soon. The needs of Korean American veterans of the Vietnam War are no different from those of U.S.-born veterans. From Agent Orange exposure to coping with complex injuries and mental illnesses, these veterans deserve the specialized care and services that only VA can provide. I hope my colleagues will join me in ensuring that these veterans, many of whom are entering their last years, are properly recognized for their service. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to comment on H.R. 366? Mr. Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Takano, you have my co-sponsorship. Absolutely, 100%. I want to make sure and explain just a little bit more. Robert Francis Mulligan was a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps when he was in Korea, and he was nearly killed by a Chinese communist soldier who threw a grenade into his foxhole, and he worked with our Korean brothers over there fighting the Chinese Communist Party. He was my hero growing up. He was my mentor. He was my father figure. He retired as the chief of police of Shaniqua, Wisconsin, after decades of service. And just as his service should be honored, so should our Korean brothers that fought with us. I want to be explicitly clear. I think that this bill is an example of what this committee is about. We do not discriminate against veterans. You are either a veteran or you are not. And everybody on both sides of this dais up here support that. And we have some differences once and again, but I know, and I'm going to speak for them freely, that you are either a veteran or not, and you will be treated as such. And here's the other thing. These are not random people. These are American citizens. And this country has moved past the point where we discriminate against American citizens. We just don't do that. You are an American or you are not. You are a veteran or you are not. So I stand in strong support, Mr. Takano, and I commend you for bringing up this oversight. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is any other member seek recognition on this amendment? No amendments were filed on H.R. 366. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none, the question now occurs on agreeing to the bill H.R. 366. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill, as amended, is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Takano for a motion to report H.R. 366.
I want to thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for those kind words, those moving words. And then, in the spirit, I move that H.R. 366 be favorably reported to the House.
All those in favor say aye. All opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion agreed to on H.R. 366 is reported favorably. At this time,
pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on H.R. 366.
So noted. The committee postponed further proceedings on this recorded vote on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Takano to the amendment in the nature of a substitute on H.R. 1669. The question occurs on agreeing to the amendment. The clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Bergman.
Aye.
Mr. Bergman, aye. Ms. Mace.
No.
Ms. Mace, aye. Mr. Rosendale.
I know. I'll do it. No.
Mr. Rosendale, no.
Ms. Rue?
Dr. Miller-Meeks.
No.
Dr. Miller-Meeks, no. Dr. Murphy.
No.
Dr. Murphy, no. Mr. Franklin.
No.
Mr. Franklin, no. Mr. Van Orden.
No.
Mr. Van Orden, no. Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell, no. Mr. Siscomani.
No.
Mr. Siscomani, no. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane, no. Mr. Self. Mr. Self, no. Ms. Kiggins. Ms. Kiggins, no. Ranking Member Takano.
Aye.
Ranking Member Takano, aye. Ms. Brownlee. Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas, aye. Mr. Mervan.
Aye.
Mr. Mervan, aye. Ms. Sherfilis McCormick.
Aye.
Ms. Sherfilis McCormick, aye. Mr. Deluzio. Mr. Deluzio, aye. Mr. McGarvey.
Aye.
Mr. McGarvey, aye. Ms. Ramirez.
Aye.
Mr. Ramirez, aye. Mr. Landsman.
Yes.
Mr. Landsman, aye. Ms. Budzinski.
Yes.
Ms. Budzinski, aye. Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
How is Representative recorded?
Ms. Mace is recorded as aye. Ms. Mace, no.
Mr. Bergman?
Mr. Bergman is recorded as aye. Mr. Bourbon, no.
Anybody else wish to change their vote? The clerk will report.
I have 13 to 13 noes. Mr. Chairman, the vote is 10 ayes and 13 noes and 2 not voting.
With the report of the 10 ayes and 13 noes, the amendment is not agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The question now occurs on my amendment, the nature of substitute H.R. 1669. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Independent chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of substitute is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider. Do what? Okay. Representative Bergman.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report H.R. 1669 as amended favorably to the House.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. And the independent chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority, supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on H.R. 1669.
So noted. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 1669 as amended is reported favorable to the House. That concludes today's markup. And to summarize today's votes, the committee has voted to report favorably 7 bills to the House floor. H.R. 1669 as amended, H.R. 562 as amended, H.R. 1089 as amended, H.R. 1530 as amended, H.R. 1529, H.R. 156 as amended, and H.R. 366. I ask unanimous consent that the committee staff and be authorized to make technical, clerical, and conforming changes to the bills favorable reported today, and hearing no objections, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent to all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extenuating material on any of the bills reported favorably today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I thank the members for their attendance today. The Committee on Veterans Affairs is now adjourned. Just like that.